Hello and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that challenges readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. As ever, I'm joined by a book-loving guest, and this episode I'm joined by Fiona. Fiona, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
It's so glad to have you on.
I'm so glad to be on. I'm really excited for this.
Yes, this has been a long time in the making for the benefit of listeners, but I'm so excited that Fiona I finally got the chance to talk about books. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. For the benefit of listeners who might not be familiar with you and what you do, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about your books? Like, why do you love reading?
Absolutely. So my name is Fiona, as we said. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the host of What Am I Rolling, which is a twice-monthly RPG or role-playing podcast. And we do sort of one-shots or sort of one-sessions in those systems. And when I talk about role-playing games, you will have heard of stuff like, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, but I explore a whole range of different systems that we can tell interesting, beautiful stories with. And that's kind of why I love reading so much. I used to read a lot. I think anyone that listens to this podcast, I read as a kid, and it changed my life. I could go anywhere I want. And I had the same thing. And then unfortunately something called university and like growing up, that you always have that gap period where you suddenly, we should go out and talk to people, and I hated that. And then I just stopped reading, and only recently, I'd say in the last 5 years, getting through to playing role-playing games, which is obviously, it's more of a running a board game, etc., but with people in it and that sort of improvisation to it. But then on top of that, when the pandemic hit, I really struggled to read fiction. So that's when I started doing my other podcast, which was the DM's Book Club, where I'd go into D&D lore, write my notes, and then talk about it with my other fellow DM, Dungeon Master. And we would just create what we like about it, what we don't like about it, etc. And then only very recently have I got back into proper, she says in quotation marks, fictional reading again. And I forgot what a joy that is. And just, it's so nice to have, and again, this is more of a privilege thing, obviously, but having a physical book to read it on, and people don't disturb you. It's great. Well, people disturb you when you have music on, but books, no one disturbs you. I found on the tube. So yeah, so I've ever since then, I've sort of been trying to read a book a week and just try and get back into it and just have that time for me, because I see it as really as a self-care thing. And I will read anything, in the sense of like, I'm very much willing to try new things. My particular sort of niches, although I haven't picked any books that are this for this one, for this episode, but I really love horror. I run lots of horror games. I love like Alien, anything sort of body horror, etc. I love writing those sort of stories, but I don't read them because they're too scary. So...
Yeah, I'm very much not a big horror fan myself, because I'm a bit of a baby when it comes to that kind of thing. I don't basically, because the books I read tend to live in my head for quite a long time, and if I need to go to sleep right after that, it's just it's not very conducive to a good night's sleep. But that difficulty with sort of continuing to read while you're at university, I completely get that, because I mean, I graduated from uni this year, but I did it part-time as a sort of over a 5-year period, and that final year with the just like you spend so much time reading stuff that's painfully boring that the idea of reading anything afterwards is just too much.
It takes the motivation. I think both the workload and like there's video games, or there's this and the other, and I definitely go through the cycle of media, as I call it now. I'm like, podcasts are great. Oh, look, there's Netflix is great. Oh, a video game, and then books never featured in it. And I was such good, because I, again, like everyone, I have the pile of shame next to the bed of various for me, again, it was a lot of non-fiction books, so stuff like the role-playing games sort of rule books, which I know sounds incredibly sad, but also like, because I do
absolutely not.
I mean, I don't know, but I also because I do, I'm a professional improviser as well, so that obviously is just doing making up stuff up on the spot, and hopefully sometimes getting paid for it. So I have a lot of books written by improvisers as well. I'm like, what's the secret? And the answer is like, yes and. I'm like, no, I know that. I paid 15 quid for this book to say yes and.
I actually heard, so I listened, so one of my niche interests is like productivity and sort of time management and stuff, and I recently added to my wish list of books a book written by an improviser. Yeah, I was like, that's the right word. Why are you questioning? Yeah, an improviser who was translating that into sort of into like productivity, but also like work in business and stuff. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. I think it's literally called Improvise with an exclamation mark at the end of it, and then there's like a bit of a lengthier subtitle. But I completely get what you mean, because so I know a lot of people who I'll sort of ask them, and this is my the reason I started the podcast was so that I could speak to more people who read, because I don't actually know a load of people who read. And I'm actually working on that. I've recently tapped into a book community in my own area that I did not know existed, and I'm very happy about that. So I'm hoping that I can maybe build my in-person repertoire of reading friends. But whenever I speak to people, especially through work and just sort of meeting in day-to-day life, and I'll ask them what they like to read, and they all say, oh, I only read nonfiction. I'm like, but you're missing out on so I read both nonfiction. I have time for nonfiction when I'm in the right headspace for sort of self-improvement and wanting to learn things, but you learn so much through fiction as well. And I'm always just like, I want to throw a really good novel at you. And I was like, I can't talk to you about, because the odds are they have not read any of the same nonfiction books that I've read.
Because nonfiction is always a subject that you have to really enjoy, right? And to get into it. So I completely agree, because you're like, oh, what have you been reading? You go, well, it's this. And I'm actually more embarrassed about the nonfiction, I would say, than the fiction. Because at least with fiction, people go, oh, that's interesting. I've never thought of that. Whereas nonfiction, like, oh, you're reading that and you're taking
It's like,
notes.
oh, you're really interested in that topic, are you?
Oh, no, stop it. Yes, the history of board games. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Yes, and it's not ironic either.
No, yeah, exactly. I actually find this very engaging.
Yeah, to be honest, so my husband and I went through a phase where we really wanted to get more into board games. So we actually bought a bunch more board games, and we have had like a role-playing board game that we have wanted to play for ages, but we need at least 4 people to play it. So
that's what is that game?
Okay, I think it's called like Animal Adventure, and the reason we bought it is because the little figurines are the best like figurines ever. I will send you a picture after we finish recording.
That sounds epic.
I think it's called Animal Adventure, and basically they give you little bios in the picture of they're all dogs and cats on the back, and they are just like, we just love them. We're like, oh, we don't know how to play this game, but we'll learn. And every time we planned a night with enough people to play, someone would get ill or it wouldn't work out, and it was just so we're still working on that. But board games, and especially sort of RPG, is stuff I've really wanted to explore more. But again, it's one of those, I mean, I can't even find someone who reads a novel.
I know it's such a tricky one. Like, I've definitely found it a lot easier. Again, pandemic had its ups and downs, obviously, for lots of reasons, but I feel like for me, because I started my podcast before the pandemic, all the recording was in person, and then suddenly I had to go online, and I was like, wait, time zones are a thing, but people could record and I could do this. And actually what came up for me actually was thinking about the accessibility of role-playing games, and like, how do we share resources, and that's obviously a whole other different topic, but it made me a much better person, in the sense of like, oh, I need to think about these things to accommodate, and like, how do we record stuff. But also it just meant I had access to these people who also want to play these games but couldn't necessarily find it in their in-person community, and it's trying to get out of that comfort zone. So I can only imagine, like, when you find people who are like you in person, you're like, oh, hello, me, that's me.
You're literally describing me in so when I went to Cheltenham Literature Festival literally earlier this month, I went by myself because I basically know literally nobody who would want to go to that with me. But it's the Times and Sunday Times Literature Festival, and I don't read newspapers, but if I did, I would be a reader of the Times, because I listen to the radio and I do read their articles online. I do wish I could justify paying for their in-person paper thingy, because I imagine it would be a great feeling, but I cannot justify the newspapers are so expensive. I mean, I know print media has had trouble, but I can't justify. But their journalism is really interesting, and I like what I can access online is all really good. But me going into that festival, I remember the first day I walked in, everywhere I looked, people were just perched reading on their own, completely, with like a coffee or a cup of tea or some kind of treat. And they were all reading the kind of books that I either love to read myself or wish I could read. And then every now and then I'd turn around, and instead of reading that, someone would be reading, just like, I think I walked into one area and there was a booth, and there was like 4 people who were obviously not there together, all reading the Times at the same time. And it was just me. Every time I spoke to anyone, everyone was just like, lovely, and they all liked the same things I liked, and it was just a really great 5 days. And I'm like, I wish I could just live at a literature festival.
That's so sweet. Yeah, it is about finding those interests and stuff, and whether it's online or in person, but just as soon as you found it, it's you don't want to get rid of it at all. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's so awesome that you get to do that. That's so cool.
But I noticed there's a lot. You might be able to tell me more about this. I have been noticing a lot more sort of board game cafes and meeting. There's so many places, even in my city, which is a tiny dinky city that doesn't really have anything cool in it, except we have just had a brand new independent bookstore, which is incredibly cool, called Drop City Books in Stoke-on-Trent. People should check it out. But also we've got two whole board game sort of cafes type. One serves alcohol as well, and they sell stuff, and they're all and they all look really cool from the outside as well. But is that helping in any way? Like, it seems to be becoming like a really popular thing. It must be big for it to have made it here.
It is. I think it's a bit like I'd say like libraries in a sense, right? Because sometimes you're like, I really want to play this game, but I can't necessarily justify the expense, or you hear about it, so you can go and learn how to play it with people. I will say sometimes, again, depending on the board game cafe, because I have been to a couple, and there's obviously people have used it, so maybe there's some pieces missing, etc. But it's and the same thing, if we talk about board games in general, I feel like the feeling of nothing worse than that first half an hour when you're sitting down and you're reading the rules and you don't understand them, and so you hear someone go, we'll just learn as we play, and you're like, oh god. But I don't think that's a problem at all. Like, again, this is just a part of the culture, but I think it's a lovely place to go meet. Like you said, there could be alcohol. There doesn't have to be alcohol. There might be some nice cakes. And if for me, the closest one to me is like a one called Drafts, and they'll have a huge library of stuff that you can look if you're looking for a 2-player game or a strategy game or anything like that. And they've got all the classics as well. If you really want to play Monopoly, although I don't know why you do that in public. But you can just test ones out. And I will say that certainly at Drafts, and I'm sure this is the same everywhere, is that the servers will probably have a bit of a knowledge about games as well, so that they can help you learn to play as well. And I think it's just a nice different experience, especially when we're coming into an age where maybe we can't afford certain things, so like we can't go out all the time, and we can't have we have to cut back on certain things. So it's just nice to be like, let's go to somewhere that we don't have to drink to enjoy ourselves. And it's the same with role-playing games as well. I think, interestingly, people have a harder time getting into role-playing games than board games, because at least with a board game, at the end of it, you're like, well, that was an experience. We'll put it back in its box and we'll just leave it there forever. Whereas with role-playing games, because a lot of it is what you put in, like you are your character. And I say this as well, I say this every time I talk about role-playing games, you don't have to act. You don't have to have the accent. You don't have to do anything like you can talk in the third person. That doesn't matter. But it requires you to engage with the story. And it requires you to sort of like yes and build with someone, which can be quite an intimate thing, right? It can be quite scary, and you can be very vulnerable. So people often will be like, I don't know how much time I want to commit to this because I might not enjoy it. Whereas at least with board games, you go, well, if I don't enjoy it, I never have to play it again. Whereas sometimes with the role-playing games, you're like, oh, I might need to commit to this for another couple of sessions, and I don't know how I feel about it. So that's why I'm always a big fan of like not only just trying RPGs, but also giving people like suggestions of like rules like RPGs, and here's one in one session, and then go away and play it and take it with your players as well. So it's not just one person always going, I've got a role-playing game, guys. Who wants to be bears trying to steal honey in Honey Heist, So.
You describing people like trying to learn the rules to stuff and still not like. We bought Pandemic for.
Yes.
Yeah, so anyone who's played Pandemic knows exactly what I'm talking about. We figured it out I think we played 2 games, but and then by the time we got to the end of it, we think we know how it works.
I feel like though that Pandemic, like it's an all right game, but there's always one person who min maxes it and be like, oh well, the all perfect move is this and this. So in the end, I'm just like, what's my move, guys? Because I've already disassociated, and that's no problem because it's a team game. But yeah, oh god, I've had too many Pandemic experiences, both in the pandemic and out of it. So.
Yeah, we like I said, we played it twice, and now I don't know if we're ever going to play it again because my husband doesn't like playing things he's not immediatly very good at. Like,
me too.
Yeah, he won't play Monopoly with me anymore because I sussed out his method to win every time. And I ruin it every single time I play with him. And I've also started telling people his method of winning every time at Monopoly.
Brutal.
And he hates it now because it's not fun for him anymore
it's
because he doesn't get to win.
One thing. It's about adapting.
Yeah, it's literally such an innocuous that his strategy is make sure you buy all of the train stations no matter what cost. And basically it doesn't seem like it should work. You should kind of have other property on the side, but generally speaking, if your main target is just all 4 train stations, you're just fine. I genuinely, when he told me this, I was like, no,
this can't work.
But genuinely, there was one point where there was 4 of us playing. I basically managed to get all the train stations before he did. and he and one of the other people we were playing with both like bankrupted themselves and sent all of their stuff to the third player just so that they could try and beat me. They had literally every other property. I had maybe 2 or 3 other properties and the trains, and they had all of the others, and they still
That's incredible.
and it still didn't work. It's amazing. But anyway, yeah, so anybody listening, you're welcome. If you want to challenge your family to a game of Monopoly, that is your strategy.
Yeah, ruin that Christmas for everyone. Go for
it. Monopoly brings out the worst in everyone. It's not a good game to play at Christmas.
It's really not.
Anyway, we have gone on a bit of a board game tangent, but I love it because I always like when guests bring something really specific and that they're because I love talking to people about stuff that they love. It's just it's never not a good time. Okay, so as mentioned before, you're going to pick 5 books.
Yes.
You can take them away with you when you're cast away, and you don't have to be cast away to a desert island because, as long-time listeners of the podcast will know, I hate sand. So I don't do desert islands, and guests can go wherever they want. So if you could be cast away forever too, where would you go?
Okay, so again, not that the books definitely aren't role-playing themed, by the way, but definitely when you talked about like where would be the little nook or something like that, instantly, and my mind goes, there is a spell in D&D called Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, and it's basically just a spell, an interdimensional thing, and it could be whatever you want. So in my head, I go into just an incredibly tall tower, that it shifts almost like cogs shifting back and forth in the different levels, and then at the top is just be a beautiful sort of room that's almost sort of like shimmering like purple glitter. I think there will definitely be a lava lamp somewhere, and 100% there'll be the soft, low chill vibes music playing on loop, and obviously a beautiful, I'm sure, like beautiful window looking out over like the cosmos. But ultimately, as long as I have a good seat or a good cushion with lots of blankets and stuff, a mug that always warms whatever drinks inside it. If it needs to be warmed, obviously, if it's a cold drink, don't do that. But it always refills itself. That's the key thing. Is that I go through like I've got my huge big tea mug here, and it's already almost gone. I drink so much tea.
British tea mug.
It's just I'm like, oh, so yeah, anything that refills the drink, refills the liquid ASAP, and then like I said, the lo-fi beats. So I'm addicted to those videos, which are like, oh, the golden oldies in another room as you're sleeping. I'm like, yeah, I'll have that on. But yeah, that's what I'd imagine. Basically a magic house.
Lots of Discworld vibes.
Yes, 100% Discworld vibes.
Your sort of cooling and heating, it just gave me this really explicit memory of I once got into a colleague's car and they just had a new car and they had cup holders in the car that both heated and cooled drinks.
No, that's amazing.
I know. I remember seeing it and I was just like blown away. I was like, we've come so far as a civilization.
Wow, I love that.
Okay. So you're going to your magnificent mansion tower with your purple and your lava lamp, and probably Terry Pratchett might show up.
I wish.
What is the first book you'll be taking with you to your castaway?
So funnily enough, I have all the books here next to me because I was like looking for that. So the first one I'd take is this one, which is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is a sci-fi novel. And if you've ever watched Firefly, that sort of TV show back in the, I want to say mid-noughties, but who knows at this point, but by Joss Whedon, and then it had a film of Serenity was the film of it. So it's exactly the same vibes. It feels, basically all it is about a crew of people that go and do a job, and they just go from point A to point B, and it's about their journey, but nothing bad happens in the journey. Spoilers, something bad happens at the end, but it's about the relationships. And this was the story behind this book, this particular copy that I've got in my hands, is that my mum, she's always like, you should read more. And I was obviously at university going, no, I'm too busy. I'm busy being important. And she heard on radio, BBC Radio 4, an interview with Becky Chambers, and she was like, no, sci-fi book. Well, Fiona used to like sci-fi. And so she got me this. And I was like, oh, all right, fine, I'll read it. And then I read it in a weekend. And I was like, this book made me feel things, and then a couple of years ago I went to some literacy festival that was part of like a bigger convention, and Becky Chambers was there, so I got it signed there. But the thing is that it was so funny because I went up to her, and obviously everyone's going there, I really love your book, it really inspired me, blah blah blah, and I went, I really loved your book. My mum got it for me, and she was like, "Oh, your mum has good taste," and I was like, "Yeah."
I was just thinking that. I was like, you've got a really good mum who listens. She not only does she listen to BBC Radio 4, which is the best BBC radio station. I will fight anyone. She listens to BBC Radio 4, but she also listens to it for book recommendations for her daughter. Just amazing.
Yeah,
Just
anything she's like, Fiona would like this, I'll send her the trailer. Fiona would like this, here is the books. And she's very much a big
and she
enabler.
knows you so well.
I honestly, I can't buy presents for her because she always one-ups me and I go, God damn it, you know.
That's that's me and my other half 100%. Like I've given up on presents now. I'm just like, I'm gonna get you practical things like underpants because you can't complain that you don't need underpants. I was like, I've given up with fun presents. I actually recently bought this book because it has been previously picked on the podcast a very long time, I think a couple of years ago. But the new independent bookstore that I mentioned earlier, Drop City Books, I went to their opening day and I was sort of mooching around and I saw that they had A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and they had a paperback copy and they had it on, like, it was marked down to like £5, and I was like, well, I cannot leave, that's such a bargain. I can't leave that on the shelf. So I grabbed it, and that is immediately skyrocketed obviously up my, because if I own it I'm more likely to read it.
Yes, that is true.
So yeah, and it's exactly the kind of dynamic that I like. That's one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to read it. Was I love I'm very character driven. In terms of my reading. Are you quite character driven? Because I mean, if the main plot is the relationships between the people, that's a lot of character.
I think because obviously with role-playing games, obviously a lot of the times if you're running them you have to think about different characters as well. But what I loved about this, so again, there's lots of sidebars happening in this, I appreciate, but sidebar, I am a massive Doctor Who fan. I love sci-fi, I love the old series, I love the new series, I'm very excited for the new Doctor, all that sort of thing. One of my biggest complaints is always that the aliens are too human. They're not creatures that are like, you know, they'll have two heads but they'll still be humanoid. And I know that's because, you know, CGI
the BBC has no budget.
Like, even when we had like Tom Baker style, it was like, that is somebody wrapped in bubble wrap, and I thought that was okay because it doesn't look like a person, you know. But with this book, not only do you have very realistic characters who have very real problems about, you know, people not fitting in or people running away, it throughout the whole series, the Wayfarer series, it explores things about like you know, individuality. Like we've got the Lovelace, the computer's AI, the ship's AI, who in, I think it's the second book, has to leave the ship and be in a body and learning to adapt to that and all those sort of things. And the relationship between an alien species, whose name I can't remember, the Allurians, I believe they're called. The descriptions of them are incredible. Like it talks about like reptile-like ones. You've got ones that are like monkeys that don't have. They're not been developed for space travel, so they have their own ships adapted to them. So you have these explorations about like accessibility in space. How do we communicate when our language aren't the same? And do we have like voice transmitters? Do we use colors in our cheeks to indicate emotion and like betray what we're talking about? It talks about polyamory as well, and so it was just so different to everything I'd sort of come across before. You know, sci-fi, when you think of like sci-fi cowboys, again, you think about that Firefly, you think about Serenity, Cowboy Bebop, all that sort of thing. And then this was just, it was just so wholesome. And I just remembered the end. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I know that's always a good book where you're just, you know, oh no, your fictional characters have problems, but you're just like, well, they're so wholesome and they just work together. Like I could have easily had like a role-playing game just based about the activities of them on their ship going to just transport cargo. That's literally the whole book. There's nothing, you know, you get the sense of like the bigger things like the politics, the different sort of empires in space and stuff, and it's just just a slice of that, and it just felt so real. And I do think it's one of the books that I think if I could make it into a story for a role-playing game, I absolutely would, just because I think it's just so, it felt so real and so different. And this book, I do credit for it getting me back into reading as a result.
Well, a really great start. And a massive sci-fi fan myself, so I'm gonna have to read this pretty soon. I mean, it's got the benefit of being recently purchased, therefore the most accessible of all of the boxed books that I have from my recent move. So I'm probably going to be able to get to it a lot easier than all of the others. So yeah, definitely.
And I would also say Becky Chambers' writing is really, it's really easy. It's not very, there's definitely like as with all sort of things in sci-fi, there's always terminology like, what is that? It's never really
Yeah.
explained. I think it's so accessible for that, and I'd say out of the series, the first one is absolutely my favorite, but the other books don't necessarily follow on the story. It's just different parts of the same system, as it were, and it just is really good. And she's also got two new, different series out, which I haven't read yet. But again, it's going to be in the same sort of like sci-fi-ness, which I'm really excited to read.
Yeah, I always forget how much I enjoy sci-fi until I pick another one up, and then I just have like a lot of fun with it. I think most recent sci-fi I probably read was the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson,
Not
which
read
is
that, but it sounds great.
I mean, if you want really good range of aliens,
I'm on it.
The first one there's less aliens in the first one because they are the humans are stranded on a prison planet, but it's in the second series they kind of, no spoilers, but they kind of introduce a lot of aliens into it, and there's range, there's a lot of
range. Yes, absolutely.
There's literally there's an entire species of sort of like squirrel fox looking aliens that all man their ships like almost like cruise ships or something, because they're so small, so there's so many of them all in one. Yeah, it's great.
That's cute. I love
it. It is, honestly. I'm just like, I could go down a whole tangent explaining the main character from that species, but it's just, it's an excellent series. I highly recommend.
On it.
So great start to the list. What is the second book you'll be taking with you?
All right, the second one, again, I have it to my side, is a very new one, actually. It's called Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. And it's about the simple thing is that it's written by an American Chinese author, I believe. Obviously, please don't quote me on that per se. But it's
pretty sure, yeah.
I think so too. But she writes from this perspective of a white American woman, who's very jealous of her Chinese friend. They both are writers. The friend, whose name, if I just double check it, that'll be pretty good. Athena. She's an up-and-coming star. Her book sold millions. Everyone really loves her, etc. So she's professionally very jealous. Whilst the lady in question, whose name is June, is very jealous, hasn't done as well, didn't get the book deal, or the book deal didn't work as well, etc. And then during a freak accident, Athena passes away, and June takes Athena's next manuscript and passes it off as her own. Now, I know it, and what's interesting, it's not the story you think it's going to be. You maybe think it's like, oh well, she's constantly like worried that people are going to find her out and this, that, and the other. And there's definitely elements of that. But what I love about this book is the sort of POV of it is that this person justifies every single reason why they've done this. Like, the manuscript, I've read it through, and there's some really good, Athena's really amazing writing here, but it's not perfect, so I'm just going to change this bit. It's now mine. Her ideas are there. That's great. And then, of course, you get the copy editors coming in, and the publishers go, oh, well, you need to change this, this, and this, and like. And then she goes, well, I've done. And then she goes, well, obviously, I'm not Chinese, but maybe if I read up all about this this particular bit, then it's fine, because I've done all the research just like Athena did. And it's just a justification of it, and this idea of exploring not just obviously Feth and who can write these kinds of stories, but also the idea of toxic friendships. As it comes out later on, Athena wasn't necessarily a really good friend, and this idea of, I know that obviously the big trope obviously of the unreliable narrator, but it's one of the best books I've read recently.
You're doing it too.
I know. It's one of the best books I've read recently where it felt so subtle, the reason why this character was justifying it, and it feels like something you could easily be friends with this person, and it's just, and you're like, oh, well, that's not, you've done a bad thing. Oh, no, it's still my work, because I've done this and I've done this and I've done this, and it's just like, it's just so subtle,
but
it's not. And honestly, it was such a, again, really well written book, and she does feel guilt, obviously, about what happens, even though it just so happens just in the wrong place at the wrong time and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I just thought it was so different to what I expected it to be, because I guess again with a title like Yellowface, and when you read the blurb you think of it maybe a certain story, and it's not that at all. And I just thought, again, it's very eye-catching. The cover, if you see, it's just eyes on a yellow background, so it instantly stands out in most bookshops. But I just thought it was so different to what I would normally read, because I don't know if I'd have read this book until it was recommended to me, and then I just fell in love with that sort of way of describing this point of view and this justifying this almost internal monologue. And it's like, oh, could I play a villain or a character who's done something bad in a role-playing game and use this sort of logic and become that character and use those characteristics for similar things? Obviously, it wouldn't be necessarily stealing someone else's written story or lived experience. But yeah, I just thought it was just so different to what I normally read. So I highly, highly recommend that.
Yeah, so I pre-ordered 3 copies of that book.
Aha!
Because, I mean, it's gorgeous. All the editions were gorgeous. So R.F. Kuang... my only experience with her was the Poppy War. Now, I read the first Poppy War book and it destroyed me inside and out. It gave me nightmares. Like, it genuinely gave me bad dreams because, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing fantasy book. So when I heard that she was coming out with a new book that was not fantasy, and she was sort of crossing over to genre, I was really excited by it. So I do have, again, on the pile of shame of books that I have not yet read. But it was one of those. She's such an amazing author that I was like, she's just auto buy at this point. And I've got the rest of the Poppy War series, which I'm going to pluck up the courage to read.
Get back, put yourself back together.
Yeah, it's gonna break my heart. I already know. I'm just like, basically, there was some ambiguity about whether a character that I really liked was dead. And I kind of don't want certainty one way or the other, because if they are dead, I'm sad. And if they're not dead, I know they're in for a lot of suffering, which makes me also sad. So, So, she's an amazing writer. And Yellowface is, I have absolutely no doubt it's worth all of the plaudits it's got. It's received so much praise, and I haven't heard a single person say they didn't like it. So...
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I think again, maybe if you're wondering about, because we always have these conversations, like in theatre and film, can so and so play this experience that they've never lived? And I think this is just such an interesting twist on it, in the sense of it's like this is how people justify why they take certain roles in films, perhaps, and are they taking this away from other people? Because it talks about why are you writing about? Because I believe the manuscript is about Chinese war veterans. I seem to remember off the top of my head, or something to do with war with the sort of Chinese population. It's like, well, why are you able to write about it when another American Chinese upcoming writer should be writing about this? And it's just fascinating how that POV, and again, it must be very incredibly well researched, but maybe this writer as well, again, not to speculate at all, but maybe they've also had to have these conversations with people going you can't write about it, it's not your experience. So so different and not what I expected at all. And I agree, I think all the accolades you hear about it, I think it's definitely, you get something out of it. Absolutely
amazing. Right, well, we've got 2 really strong books to start off with. What is the third one you'll be taking with you?
All right, I'm sure this book has already been picked several times on your show, but it's one of those books in the pandemic that really helped me, and I think helped a lot of people, and that is, of course, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. And it's just, again, it's mostly drawings, so not a proper book in that sense, but what I loved about it is that, again, it came to me at a point when I was feeling really bad. And I think anyone that, if you do feel bad at any point, I think reading just a couple of pages of the book just really centers yourself. And I know some people, when the animation came out, they felt they were a bit like, oh, it's a bit cheesy, or it's a bit, it's a bit wet in places. I understand. But also, there's just something wholesome about having these 3 characters with a boy who's just trying to get home. And obviously it's beautifully illustrated, and it's just this idea of, again, quotes that you put on the wall, live, laugh, love, all that sort of thing. But it's, I don't know, I can't describe it. Like the mole saying, I think it's time for cake. I'm like, God, you're so right, mole. Yeah. And the only thing we can give each other is kindness and all that sort of thing. And I just think I think as well, and maybe this is just me putting that version on it, and of course each to their own, but it feels very much for male presenting characters that are talking about feelings and about being vulnerable, and we don't get that as much as I think we should. And I just think there's just something about it where I'm like, this is actually really important for everyone, and it feels maybe it's aimed at children, perhaps, just the drawings, but I don't think so. Like I've sent copies to my mum, my sister. It makes an easy Christmas present for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something about it, and I know there's another book in the works, but I just thought there's just something about it's just so simple, and it's just, again, I think I love journeys. I think that's what it is. I like people going from point A to point B, and it's about the journey. So I 100% would recommend The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. But I'm sure everyone has got that on their shelf at some point at the moment.
Well, funnily enough, so I have got it on my shelf, but it's not mine, and I haven't read it because I have a lovely, lovely friend called Kate who, when my son was born, nearly 2 years ago, was the only person who bought me a book. It's like no
What?
one knows me.
Yeah, hang on.
It's the only person who bought a book as a gift for my son. And obviously he was a newborn, so it was very little. And she inscribed it in the front to say that it was something that, not for him now, but would be in the future. And she hoped that it would, mean a lot to him and sort of bring sort of things. And it was love. It was one of the most thoughtful gifts that I received after I had it. And I have almost been too scared to read it myself because I kind of don't know if I want to experience it the first time with him when we read it together, or whether I would need to read it first just to check. I don't know. I'll probably get round to it at one point. But
I think yeah, I would say it's a lovely experience to. I think if you've not read it yet, 100% do it with your son. I think from memory there isn't anything too scary or dangerous. So I think you're okay on that point. But yeah, I think, like I said, I came to it where I can't remember exactly, but I was like, I'm really sad, and I was like, oh, fine, and then I read it and I was like, well, I feel sad, but I feel the better kind of sad. And it was just a nice, I think, again, I was talking about it before, I really was struggling to read in the pandemic, and so again, obviously it's very beautifully illustrated as well, but it just made it so much easier to get through. And I'd say I didn't get it through in one sitting either, because I wanted to savor it. So I was like, I don't know where it's going, but I am enjoying this. So yeah, you can easily do like a couple of pages and then just shut it and save it for next time.
Well, at risk of going on about the Charlton Literary Festival, the author of this book was actually there.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet him, unfortunately, because I was in another event. But I did speak to a lot of people who went to his event, and they were saying that he really blew everyone away. He said he was really good with the kids, but not only that, he is really sort of humbled by the response to the book, because I think for him, he kind of thought, he was putting his thoughts and things down, and it was, it's something that he created, but he wasn't expecting it to have the amazing sort of response. And then with it being on TV and everything, he just wasn't expecting what has come afterwards. And yeah, apparently he's just a lovely, lovely, lovely man.
Just a nice guy
who is just still so humble and happy that people read his book.
I recommend checking out his Instagram, because he goes into various cafes and paints some of the drawings. Like usually it's like, I was at a friend's cafe today and I've done this, and obviously it's like a beautiful drawing. You're like, oh, it's wholesome. He goes, thanks. I also hid in the toilet at the Oscars because I was too frightened, and we got an Oscar and I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, oh, it's okay, Charlie. We like your book. So yeah, I think there's. It's something again that it's just, I guess, a very unassuming, just someone getting on with their stuff, and then suddenly we're like, no, it's okay, yay, we support you.
That just proper reminded me of instances when my nan would say, oh, bless his little cotton socks.
Yes, that's 100%. That's 100% the vibe.
Well, I mean, it's such a good mix. You're gonna have such wonderful reading at your in your little location. I know. Okay, so what's the fourth book you'll be taking with you?
All right, so going from one sort of more illustrated book to then a play. So one of my favourite theatre companies, as I said, I'm sort of an improviser. I am. I need to admit that.
Own it.
Own it. Is the Mischief Theatre. And so they've been going around for about 10 years or so, or more than that. They started when they were at acting school together. And so they've done stuff like The Play That Goes Wrong.
I've wanted to see this.
Yes, and it's just such a simple concept, and I'll go through this because they've done The Play That Goes Wrong, they've got Peter Pan Goes Wrong, A Bank Heist Goes Wrong, they've got The Goes Wrong Show on iPlayer, which I watch quite a lot, because it's really, I find it really funny, but also it's very comforting. And you've seen stuff like A Christmas Carol Goes Wrong, all that sort of thing comes over at Christmas. It feels like a very British, she says in quotation marks, institution. And The Play That Goes Wrong, all it is that they've set up this idea of a Amdram theatre called it's some sort of what did it call it? It's the Cornley Polytechnic Drama Society, and in this particular one, the play that goes wrong, they embark on producing an ambitious 1920s murder mystery, and so it's a play within a play essentially, and each of the sort of characters are very much they're sort of the original people that played them turned up to 100. You know, so you have the director who's very, very controlling, but he's also the inspector who's trying to get people. You have the sort of absent-minded Dennis who is frightened and doesn't remember his lines, so he has to write them on his hand, and certain pronunciations which he always gets wrong. You have the murder victim who appears an act too early, and then who's like, "Not now, Inspector," and then they're like, damn it, and they've got everything wrong. And what I loved about it is that when I went to see it again, I would highly recommend if you're in London, or it's around the world now as well, you can go see it in various big cities. It's that the setting of it is great. This idea you have this drama society who have various high tensions with each other through various things, and then they have to perform a play as these characters. So again, it's that idea of the character driven stuff, and forgetting things, losing props, getting members of the audience to come up and help doing certain things. One thing I absolutely love, they have on the sides, they have a stagehand called Trevor, who
okay,
yeah, Trevor, of course.
My apologies to anyone called Trevor listening.
Not at all. He has the best part, I think. But, he has to make sure that things work, and he put up the whole set. But of course, as always, the set goes wrong. And I remember it was one of the first things I saw in London by myself, and it was a beautiful set. And it's again minor spoiler. But at one point, there's like the main sort of set, like a big living room, and then there's like a lift that goes up, and then there's like a tiny sort of like a quarter stage up top that's held up by a pole, and so they go up there, and at one point, obviously, it falls like this, and when I saw it the first time, it generally felt like something had gone wrong. Because it was obviously they're so good. Everything is always very, very rehearsed, but like then they're still trying to act as they're slipping down this half stage in the air, and you think people are going to get hurt. There's lots of stage fighting, there's arguments, and it just brought to me like stuff like when I just remember like GCSE drama and like plays, like you'd have these characters and it felt so real. And so just to have a copy of it, so just reading through like some of the wordplay, there's a bit where the guy who can't remember is very forgetful. He keeps repeating his line, so then they get into a loop about what is being said, and they're trying to get him to say the next line, but he can't remember it. And it is so simple. And again, on text, like you're like, oh god, they repeated themselves. But watching it, getting people more and more frustrated as they're trying to do the things, and then one person's like keeps drinking something, and they're like spitting out like I think it's like some sort of it's spirits in the end, or some sort of keep spitting it out onto the guy, and they're like, come on, get the line right. And yeah, it's interesting. I saw there was some sort of study I saw which was about what makes something funny. And is it the performance? Is it the written word? Is it just the circumstances? Is it like the context of the story? And I feel for this, the play that goes wrong, for sure, it's a mixture of all those things together. And just having the text, again, it just makes me think of a wonderful time. I wish I could play it. I wish I could be these people. I think my only criticism is that there's not enough women parts or female presenting parts. But that's always the case. And I feel like you could easily go, no, I'm going to be the director. I'm going to be the anal retentive director who can't find the script. That will be me. So
I've always wanted to see this. It's been on I mean, to be honest, if I could list everything that I've wanted to see in the
I know,
theatre,
welcome to my life as well.
I mean, because we have a very small local theatre, so I don't very often. I think this did visit us though very briefly, and I think I missed it at the time. So I will have to try and find another opportunity. But yes. I think reading plays, actually, I still really enjoy reading plays. I mean, my first experience of reading plays would have been, apart from Shakespeare, would be An Inspector Calls by Jamie Priestley, which most school children are taught in the UK, and that was also my introduction to the political spectrum as well. I'd never learned about it before then. But I still think you get I still think it works. I don't know, because I guess because I'm so used to being a fiction reader, when you read a play, it's the same thing. You just have to sort of conjure the characters in your head, and you have to do a little bit of filling for the background, because there's maybe less of that there.
And Inspector Calls is also a cracking shout as well, because that is a lot of monologues and flashes back. You don't see what's happening. It's someone's voice, and then you piece together what's happening until the final sort of character comes up, and you're like, oh, and you work out through these people's monologues what happened to this particular to the victim that the inspector's talking about, and how everyone had an impact on it. And it's just what 100% would recommend seeing it. As obviously, like you said, I also read it too, but I remember seeing it at the Lowry Theatre in Manchester, and it had because all of it's set in one place as well. It's in the kitchen, the dining room of this obviously very well off mansion, and they had a tiny mansion on like a little staging, and then it opened up, and it was just incredible. And then people would come down out into the crowd a little bit, and people would go up into this tiny house, and it was just it was just so stunning and so striking to hear the words as I'd read them just come out in such a way, and again getting that performance of it. So 100%.
I'm a big musical fan, so I always associate the theatre with musicals. But whenever I get chance to do to go to a play, I'm always surprised by how much I enjoy it. I think I haven't seen Inspector Calls live, but I have seen another JB Priestley play called On a Dangerous Corner, which
I've not heard that one.
Which was really good. I enjoyed it so much when I went to watch it. I actually went on my own, which wasn't intended. I was supposed to go with a friend, and then her bus got cancelled and she couldn't make it. So I kind of was stood outside the theatre waiting for her, and I was like, well, I need to go in because I've got the so I went in with my ticket and everything, and I watched something on my own for the first time. I remember it being a really interesting experience, because I like to comment on things when I'm with someone, but when I'm by myself, I won't do that to strangers, because peer pressure gets to me. It's because society, I'm just like, no, they don't like it when you do that, so I don't. But it actually means that I pay better attention, so maybe I should go to more stuff on mine. But really, really good. And the play that goes wrong is even the poster. The poster just tells you everything, because it just looks like quintessential British comedy. It just it looks like everything you associate with the most iconic British comedy. It just looks like it. That's just what the screen, even down to the white background, it's like, and the font they use.
I'd highly recommend, again, I'm always recommending stuff, but in the Goes Wrong show in season 2, so again it has a story.
I think I'm gonna have to watch this like tonight.
It's on iPlayer. So obviously there's been, you could tell behind the scenes, again, you're picking these stories that they're putting on for the BBC, the play of the week, and obviously things go wrong until the final sort of 2 episodes where they go to the director, unless you step down, we're leaving, we're having a coup, etc. So the director goes, all right, why don't you put on what you think people would enjoy? So they have a Cornley festival, and each of the individual characters get to do something. So you have Robert, who's the thespian, does an acting class. You have I can't remember her actual name. I think she's not called Natalie, but she's very nervous, so she goes, we're going to do an improv, and it's terrible, and then you've got one that's like animals, and they're all dressed up as animals, and it's just, and just like, this is the kind of theatre, this is the kind of festival that we'd probably be a part of. And it just feels, you just really get to attach to all these different types of characters, and certainly there's like, again, all the different places of the week they do, there's like a prison one, there's one that's called At 90 Degrees, but then they say, oh well, the builders saw 90 degrees and they didn't think it was going to be the heat, so all the sets are on a 90-degree angle, but obviously they're filmed the right way, so you have things where people are trying to get water to someone, it just goes in their face, because obviously again, I could talk about mischief theatre for days, but I do always start off with Play Goes Wrong and see where you go from there.
Okay, well, we've even gone to a range of formats now, so what is the 5th and final book you'll be taking with you?
Right, so we'll go into a different format again. So there's a bit of context behind this. So as I said, I do role-playing games, and one of my regular games, D&D, I used to do one-shots, because I felt comfortable doing that. I could do the story in a couple of sessions, and I wouldn't have to worry about like putting things together too long, or creating a huge world, right? But in D&D, and obviously lots of other RPGs, you have published modules or scenarios that you play through and do a longer campaign of. So I brought 2 books on top of this. So I've got one of the most famous current modules of the D&D 5th edition, which is Curse of Strahd, which is like a gothic, romantic sort of horror adventure. But then on top of that, I've got She is the Ancient, which is the gender bent version of it. So I'll talk about it. So essentially, there's these things called the Domains of Dread in the world of Faerun, or the world of the Lost Realms, essentially. And once you're in there, you're kind of trapped in a very small space. Think about the size of Luxembourg. And there's dark lords and ladies, and that they have, basically, it's their prison. The realm itself is sort of reflecting of their mood and stuff. And one of the first ones was a vampire called Zard von Zarovich. And very much like Dracula, they sort of pined for somebody, a person called Tatiana, who was going to marry their younger brother Sergei. And in a fit of jealous rage, Strahd killed Sergei, and Tatiana was like, "How could you do that?" and throws herself off the castle Ravenloft balcony to her demise. And then, because of this evil act, Strahd's sort of signs a pact with the evil powers that be, the dark powers, and becomes this undead lord vampire who draws in adventurers over a huge loop. Essentially, it's almost like a time loop, and at every adventure comes, Tatiana is reincarnated as some other person. Strahd tries to grab her and find that lost love. It never works out. And so
shocking.
On and so forth. What? Who knew like taking a lady and like saying you must love me doesn't work. But what is amazing about it is if you type in Curse of Strahd to YouTube, you will find so many actual players, so people recording their sessions of this storyline, because it's such a simple storyline. It's got horror, you're trapped, and this idea that someone's obsession to have their happiness and cause suffering of it. Because there are people in this land, you've got Barovians, sort of the inhabitants, who can't leave. And there's an idea about reincarnation as well, in the sense of like sometimes you might not be born without a soul, and those people who have souls, they have meaning in their lives, whereas those people who don't, it's a horrible existence. And this idea of suffering and playing on it, and that you as the adventurers, as the players in this campaign, you have a chance to change it. Now, that all said, it's a very intriguing story. We love a little bit of horror. We love vampires. I was a Dracula girl, and I was never a Twilight girl, but I still read them. But the problem, as there is a problem, it is very much very male dominated. And of course, with vampires, you always have that issue of consent, that sexuality, and it can get a bit gruesome. I'm not going to lie, some of the wording in Curse of Strahd isn't great. I will obviously not repeat it, but it's one of those things where you're like, we can make this better. Certainly if it's one of the most popular systems or sort of scenarios that people are playing over and over again because they love the story. So that's why I got, there's a person called Beth the Bard who wrote a gender-bent version of Curse of Strahd, which basically flips the genders of, I think, 90% of the NPCs, including Strahd, to the opposite gender, and then rewrites bits of it where she was like, because she has run Curse of Strahd so many times as a professional DM, and she's like, players don't like this, so I'm going to change this. So, for example, in the introductory adventure, you're in something called the Death House, which is terrifying, right? But then
no, it sounds so pleasant.
Oh, you should go. It's on Airbnb. But there's obviously links to children there who like say, "Oh, come in. There's a monster in the basement." Which you're like, "Oh, well, I'm not going in that basement. Don't be ridiculous." Nope. But again, not to give any spoilers, but in the original, there's a lot of indication of child neglect, murder. There's even references to a stillbirth, and you're like, maybe we don't need to have those stories to have a horror. Like we talk about session zeros now in both improv and role-playing games and Lines of Veils, which basically we just sit at the table and go, what don't we want in our game? What stories do we not want to explore? Because we don't know what people find uncomfortable, and we want rather make the characters uncomfortable, not the players. And so that's what I really love about role-playing games, is that we can have this conversation honestly, and it might feel a little bit like a bit of admin, but at the same time we can have those conversations, go, what's off the table? But then we're like, what's on the table? How creepy do we want to go? What would make this session shine for you? And that's the best bit, because you can really then push those boundaries whilst keeping that trust alive. And so that's why I think is so good about Curse of Strahd, is that it's got a really gripping story for most people, and then using the second book, the She is the Ancient, just to change it a little bit, so that we're like, let's make it accessible, so it's not just, say, white men at the table. It could be anyone.
But they're so neglected in society.
Oh, I don't know.
They've had such a rough time of it.
Yeah, you know what? They've had a hard couple of years. Maybe we should give them a break.
Yeah. So since you're only allowed to take one, is your choice She is the Ancient?
It is going to be She is the Ancient.
Yeah.
I feel like, because the problem is, obviously, it doesn't have the full Curse of Strahd one, but I thought for context, I would give the idea of Curse of Strahd. But yes, She is the Ancient.
Good to
100%.
introduce us to it.
Yeah, I thought She is the Ancient is just, it just has, again, it has a huge, it's not about the story per se. Again, you get a little bit at the beginning, but also you got these incredible, again, I appreciate you can't see, but you get like little images of the person, locations of interest, and some mannerisms and suggestions, and it's just a nice book of NPCs. You don't have to use them in anything. But again, you know what, you said it before, are you character driven? I think so by the end of this.
Maybe. I think that might be something that I'm detecting.
Yeah, I think you've got that after I don't know, I didn't realize that for 5 years, but there you go. But yeah, I think just having, and again, it's a whole range of people, obviously people who are the shopkeepers, all the way to the evil lich that is in the Amber Temple, which you probably shouldn't make a bargain with. But here's a little bit of backstory. Yeah, exactly, probably. Players are still going to do it though, unfortunately.
Yeah,
you can't help with them. So yeah.
You could take a horse to water, but you know, I like the idea of establishing sort of what is on the card and what isn't, just because
100%.
I mean it's obviously not a world I've got much experience with, but like from my own perspective with reading, for me very much reading is an escape, and so there are specific books and types of stories that I just won't read because it's just not what I'm looking for in my leisure time. And I know for other people, they find it, you know, either interesting or cathartic, or it's for some whatever reason, they don't mind having those in their leisure time. And I appreciate that, you know, different things for different people. But I imagine the same with sort of gaming, and that's, you know, it's for some people it's an escape and they don't want to talk about those things because some people just don't want stuff like that in their leisure time, whereas other people, I mean, especially with horror, I mean, for me personally, I'm just it's one of the reasons why I'm not very good with horror movies or scary movies. I'm like, if they're scary, I don't enjoy them because I'm scared. And if they're not scary but they're meant to be, it means they're bad.
No, I feel that. I agree. I agree with you about the books though. Like I've read I can't remember if I think it's called The Book of Dust, the second one by Philip Pullman. And I enjoy Philip Pullman's work. I've always enjoyed like the Northern Lights trilogy, etc. And then this new one, I was like, oh, absolutely. And then in that book, the second one, there is, I don't want to say randomly because I definitely did. Maybe I just didn't see it, but there is references to a sexual assault on the main character, and I was like, absolutely not. I actually put that book down for a long time because I felt angry because she's been painted. Lyra has been painted as this very obviously. Again, I know it's different. It's set a little bit later than the Northern Lights trilogy. She's been set out as this, you know, something bad has happened to her. This tragic backstory has been built, and she's not connected to her daemon anymore, which is a very sad but interesting story what to look into. And then they have a sexual assault, and I was like, we didn't need that. And and it really dragged me out of the story as a result. And that's to say as well, I don't think we need like content warnings on everything, but I'd like to have like just a few like little bits and pieces. If there's like, for example, any talk about self-harm or abortion, then maybe I don't want to read about that, or I can come back to that in my own time. And I think that it's interesting because we have this talk, speaking of white men, they're like, oh, but I want to play games and I don't want to spoil it for me. And it's like, it's not spoiling, it's more like this is coming up, and then you can really lean into it, or you could be like, oh, actually I'm going to tap out at this point, and then we can rewind or fast forward or any of those things. And I just think just having that there just means that, like you said, the people that are with us are really with us and they want to support us, rather than just them sitting going, oh, I don't like this, and feeling uncomfortable, because I don't think that's the point of media at all. I think you're supposed to enjoy it and get ideas and be inspired to do whatever you want from it and take what you want from it, rather than be like left on the sidelines.
Yeah, exactly. And I just find, I mean, especially with a lot of, and some of the things that people don't want to read about, they're quite difficult to do well. Not many people who produce media can do them well. And I mean, if there's anything worse than reading something that's sort of very uncomfortable for you anyway, it's experiencing something that's very uncomfortable for you, but that's also been done very poorly and gratuitously and not and unnecessarily. It's it kind of adds insult to injury, really, in those instances. 100%. So yeah, I'm completely the same. Like, I'm very much like, I try and take it on myself to sort of search my own trigger warnings. And for me personally, it's like, if I do read a book and it is in there, especially if the book has been out for a while, for me, I'm like, you know what, that is on me. There is no reason why I can't, you know, quickly Google the title of this book and the thing I want to avoid and find that myself. So like, for me, I'm very much just like, oh, you know, that's my I suppose,
Absolutely.
responsibility. But I appreciate that it's something that's been brought into these spaces as well. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the benefit of listeners, would you just like to recap all 5 books that you'll be taking with you, so that they can, run off to buy them from their local independent bookstore?
Absolutely. So if I put into my imaginary backpack, going along to my amazing mansion, so we have just read them. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy, The Play That Goes Wrong by the Mischief Theatre, the script, and then and She is the Ancient by Beth the Bard. Again, those last 3 your mileage may vary, but again, just all of them have different ideas, and they touch on various touchstones which really make up what I do as a performer, both in role-play games and in improv. So there you go.
I think the people who take a play to them, you mentioned about mileage, just really thinking, I think the people who take a play with them actually get quite a lot of mileage out of that, because I just imagine them like on their own, learning all of the roles and then performing the entire thing by themselves.
I know. My mum comes with a new book, opens the door, and I'm just there. Various things have gone wrong. The mansion is falling apart, and I'm just there going, "Hello."
It just reminds me of there was a Taskmaster challenge where they were all tasked to learn different parts of a play, but whilst the other people weren't there, and then they had to stick the videos together to make it. But Richard Herring was on that episode and that series, and for fun, they made him learn all of the parts and made him perform all.
So cool! Oh my god!
And they stuck. Oh yeah, all very funny. But so that is your list of 5. What are any books that you nearly took with you, but then changed your mind or didn't end up adding them?
I mean, I could have taken my whole D&D book collection, to be honest with you. Not because I would read them cover to cover, but it's just more the ideas of all the different adventures and stuff, for sure. I do have some poetry books by Carol Ann Duffy, and again, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but she did a collection of poems about the wives and partners of various famous figures. And I always remember, like, Mrs. Icarus, who goes, "Oh, bloody sod, he's done it again." And that's all it is. And I just, anything that's a little bit different like that, I always take as a sign. There's also, I can't remember his name, which is always bad for a book place. There's a guy who's a famous poet. He did a book about cats, and it is the Mackesy cats, and they talked about mobster cats and all that sort of thing. And I just absolutely love that. I'm going to look it up now. I'm sure it will come up to me in a second. I think it's Richard McGough. I think he's called.
I'm terrible with names, so I completely understand your struggle. I can do names or faces, but not both.
I mean, it's not Mackesy because that is Cats the musical. Anyway, I think it's Richard McGough. I think he did a whole book about poetry about cats, and I think not that I'm a cat person. My partner is the cat person. He has a cat called Fancy Alice, and it's one of those books where I'm like, I need to give it to him at some point. That will be my present, and he would enjoy that. But I think it would be poetry books with what I would bring that didn't make it in, because I don't read enough poetry as is, and I think it's a different art form to express, and it's one of those ones where I feel like I'm not intelligent enough to grasp it. I just need to spend more time reading it. And I think it's the same with Shakespeare. I think some of the Shakespeare's plays are so evocative, like what's the one that Tom Hiddleston was in that I saw? I can't remember. It doesn't again.
Hamlet, King Lear, Macbeth.
No, it was the one about there was a film as well, but I can't remember.
I wish I could help you. I'm not very good
at
Shakespeare.
We're both looking at you. We're going.
I'm really. It sounds like something that he don't think he'd be in one of the comedies, and the comedies are really where I am. I set my camp with Shakespeare.
One, yeah. Quickly Google.
I don't know. The Tempest.
No, it was a war one.
Oh right, that could have been any of the kings. I imagine
it was a tragedy. Not the Hollow Crown. I know he was in the Coriolanus.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because that again, and I would say that as well. I'm not genres I don't read at all is warfare per se, because I don't particularly like it, because sometimes I feel like it is glorified, certainly in role playing games. You get that, but there's something about Coriolanus is, again, maybe I'd take the script for Coriolanus that didn't get in, just because that's about a hero who is like sort of supported and he's amazing, but then he falls through paranoia and through like not listening to subjects who are like they're indifferent to him, and that sort of paranoia. So it's just again another really interesting character study. So yeah, I think either Coriolanus or some poetry book. Those were the ones we're getting.
They are some great extra tidbits for people listening. So thank you so much for talking to me about your books.
No
If
worries.
listeners wanted to find you and your work and listen to you talk about all of the amazing characters and story ideas that you work with, where could they find you?
Oh, so when I'm not dribbling on about various books that I'm like, oh, this is a good book, I should read it again. You can find me on What Am I Rolling, which is a twice monthly RPG role playing one shot podcast where we look at different systems, ideally, and like look at the different mechanics. Be like, how does this mechanic make it for an interesting story? We've done all sorts. Obviously, D&D is the big one, so Dungeons and Dragons. But recently, we've done Flabbergasted, which is like a 1920s, Roaring Twenties RPG. So if you think you're Jeeves of Worcester, very similar vibes to that. Yeah, I know it, and just the stories we could have with that. Okay, that was quite fun. And we've also done ones like a Numenera, which is like a sci-fi things where there's weird pyramids floating in the sky. You're like, this is probably going to be scary. So yeah, lots of different stories, lots of different things. There's also some solo RPGs on there as well, which means that you play by yourself, which is a very intimate experience, I would say. But it's something I always recommend trying out. Like you were saying before about going to the theatre on your own, I do that all the time because I don't have time. I don't have time for people not to say no to me. I'm already there.
It's always a risky game to buy tickets for other people to things as well, or to wait for them.
You know what? I've completely forgot. Neil Gaiman is one of my favourite authors, and I would totally put in Ocean at the End of the Lane.
I just read that.
It's so sad. That I would say if you can go see the stage play because that's going around again. Because it's made me cry so bad. And it's just really well put together. Anyway, yeah, it's a great book. Anyway,
I just read it for a book club, so yeah, I've got to go and talk about that in a couple of weeks.
Very good. So What Am I Rolling? That's wherever you can find podcasts. But if you're like, I just want to hear about high fantasy and the mechanics for that, well, we've got the DM's book club as well, which is more about that, but also how we can improve that. And essentially, all we do is just talk about cool story ideas that we want to do, and then we never do it. So if you like unrealized dreams and ideas, that's where you can find them. So that's the What Am I Rolling and the DM's book club, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Sounds great. So I recommend everyone go check those out. And if you like this episode of the podcast, let us know through reviews or comments or social media. You can find us at Books to Last Pod on Instagram and Twitter. I will say I'm not very good at Twitter at the moment. I mainly spend time on Instagram, but I will respond to most messages people send me. And yeah, so go and follow us over there, and you can listen to us where all good podcasts are found. So, listeners, thank you so much for listening. Fiona, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure. And until next time, bye for now.